back in public.
Bonjour. Les tests de son ont
Été fait. Mr. Garrison, I see your hand up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. At this point, I'd like to move the motion that I gave notice of on June 21st, 2023. And that motion states that given the rising tide of hate and violence directed toward the 2S LGBTQI plus community at home and around the world, the House call on leaders at all levels of government in Canada to A, speak out strongly in favor of Canadian values of equality and inclusion for the 2S LGBTQI plus community, B, deplore all disruptions of lawful public activities, including pride events and all children's sport and educational activities, and C, condemn all attempts to disrupt democratic institutions, including school boards, when dealing with policies concerning equality and inclusion. So I'd like to move the motion and ask that the motion be adopted by this committee and reported back to the House at the earliest possible moment. And with your permission, I'll say a few words about the motion.
Thank you. The motion is so moved. What do I do now?
So if I can then, Madam Chair,
Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead. Please speak.
What we've seen is a growing tide of hate and violence. A lot of it motivated initially online, but it spills over into the real world and has real impacts on people's lives and their ability both to feel safe, but also to participate fully in Canadian society. So what this motion does is not call for specific actions by Parliament, but it's a motion to urge all of us to speak in favor of equality and inclusion when it comes to my community. We've seen events ranging from disruption of school board meetings to disruption of children's sporting days by those who have some preconceived idea of what children of a certain gender should look like, to actual hate attacks in my own community where pride flags were torn down from a house, thrown up against the house, and set on fire. And so we're seeing an explosion of these kinds of things. And again, I think much of it starts online, but it has real impacts in our communities and the feeling of safety that certainly my community doesn't share with everybody else. And they're not feeling able to participate in the community at the same level as other people. So I could spend a lot of time talking about it. I don't think that what I'm asking is particularly controversial in terms of the actions. But I think given the actions of some of the provinces, including Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Alberta, that it's time for all of us to say that public policy should be based on science and reality and not based on misinformation and hatred. And we've seen examples just this week of the Premier of Alberta basing a policy about kids who need access to gender-affirming health care on myth, legend, I would say, rather than the reality and the advice of medical professionals. And so this is an attempt to have all of us speak, I guess, for calm when it comes to these issues, for basing our decisions on science and good public policy, but also for reassuring everyone in Canada that we are a diverse and inclusive society where everyone can participate equally. Thank you.
Mr. Moore? Sorry, Mr. M. Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you to Mr. Garrison for first tabling the motion and now moving it. It's an important and necessary discussion that we have, especially in light of some events that are going on around the country. It's important that, I was going to say the government, but it's important that all politicians stand up, frankly, and very, very loudly vocalize their support for what you're saying today. And I just want to say I fully support it. I appreciate it. I look back on some of the things that the government has done over the last number of years, including Parliament, the universal, we had unanimity on the ban of conversion therapy. And that's something that we should all stand proud of and celebrate. So I will be supporting your motion, and I'm very grateful for you to tabling today.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And when we saw that I saw that Mr. Garrison had tabled this motion. I looked at it and considered it. I'm unable to support the motion as it's currently worded. Some time ago, looked at how it could be amended that would be able to support. Certainly, condemn all acts of hate and violence and hate speech. And I understand, I think, what Mr. Garrison is getting at, but I also know that some of the wording here, I feel, could unfairly target parents, for example, who simply want to speak up at, as it mentions here, school boards. One person's attempt to disrupt is another person's attempt to participate. And I cannot support that. So what I had suggested is language that says, I mean, I can read in what I would amend, that we speak out strongly in favor of Canadian values of equality and inclusion for all Canadians, reiterate the right of all Canadians to assemble peacefully, including for pride events, sports events, educational activities, religious activities and places of worship, etc., and reaffirm that democratic institutions, including school boards, are free to debate matters openly and freely, including on matters of equality and inclusion. So this is this amendment, I think, gets to what we're trying to say with Mr. Garrison's amendment without limiting the ability for Canadians to participate fully in discussion on these important matters. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Housefather?
Just to be clear, this is on Mr. Moore's amendment? Did he propose an amendment?
I don't,
Yes, he did. Yeah, that's.
so that's, okay. And I think, is that what, I think they're circulating his amendment.
Okay.
It seems to be in 2 languages, yes. The clerk and the table is checking to ensure the amendment is in order first before we can talk about it.
So the debate will. What it does, what the.
Okay, we can proceed now. Do I have a list of speakers? I think I have Mr. Garrison. Point of order?
Madam Chair, I would ask you to rule that this is not an amendment. This is a substitute motion or a different motion. It makes no reference to the 2S LGBTQI plus community, which is the topic of my motion. So this is a different motion, and I might, in fact, be able to support such a motion, but it does not deal with the topic of my motion. So I don't understand how it could be considered an amendment which is in order, since it makes no reference to the main subject of my motion.
Is, can I hear members on that, please, first?
Madam Chair, I
Yes?
don't know if Mr. Garrison is, I understood he was looking for a ruling. So you want us to give input into your ruling? Is that?
I want a bit of an explanation from Mr. Garrison and then from you, that you brought, of what you brought over. Yes, I do.
Well,
Before I make my
understand
ruling.
what Mr. Garrison is saying, and perhaps, the wording could be tweaked a bit. This says that giving the rising tide of hate and violence towards minority communities, if it makes Mr. Garrison happy, we could say giving the rising tide of hate and violence towards minority communities, including the 2S LGBTQ I plus community at home and around the world. The House calls on leaders at all levels of government in Canada too. But where we disagree, and hopefully the wording that I have included is inclusive enough, but I would not want anything coming from this committee that would suggest, for example, Mr. Garrison's motion says, condemn all attempts to disrupt democratic institutions, including school boards. I've seen situations where parents wish to participate at school boards, and just by the very action of showing up, that is seen as disruptive. Like, how dare you come and speak out about something that impacts your school where your children attend? So I cannot accept Mr. Garrison's motion as worded, which is why I put forward what I consider to be a friendly amendment. But I do see where he's coming from on it, so perhaps a friendly sub-amendment to tweak the intro as I mentioned, if that's acceptable.
Mr. Garrison?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to restate my position that this is a motion about the rising tide of hatred toward a particular community, not toward all minority communities, because I don't think there is a rising tide of hatred toward all minority communities in Canada. So in essence, it is a different motion. And to Mr. Moore's comments about school boards, I am not talking about someone showing up at school boards, and I don't think he can provide any examples where people simply by showing up were excluded. What happened, and we have several instances, and I can cite them, where school board proceedings were disrupted and shouted down by people who did not agree with decisions or debates that the school boards were having. So, in fact, I think this is quite a different motion, and I would ask the chair to rule it out of order. And if Mr. Moore would like to move this motion after we've dealt with my motion, as I said, I might consider supporting it, but it's a different motion.
Before we do, Mr. Housefather?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to weigh in support of what Mr. Garrison said. Look, this is as if I put forward a motion on anti-Semitism and I referred to Jews. And then somebody pulled the word Jews out of the motion, and it was no longer about Jews and the flagrant anti-Semitism that we're now facing, but a general portrayal of everything. And so I do agree that the motion by itself may be perfectly fine, but it's not the motion that Mr. Garrison intended, and even it's a wholesale amendment to the subject of the motion, to the core subject. So I think it actually is unreceivable, Madam Chair. I mean, first of all, in order for it to be receivable, there would have to be an actual amendment here, and this isn't an actual amendment, it's an entirely new motion. You would have to say that we propose to strike all the words after the word to and substitute A, B, and C by the following. That would be the way an amendment would be drafted. This isn't even drafted as an amendment. It's just drafted as a new motion. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to suspend for a minute or two. I'm going to ask you to speak to each other and come back to the table. And if need be, I'm going to ask for a vote. back to order. I see all members are ready to proceed and sitting around the table. The members have asked for a decision. Having looked at the new motion that's presented, I'm going to rule it out of order because it's a entirely new motion than the motion that's presented. We have two motions in front of us. We can deal with the second one at a later time. I don't have an issue with that. But right now, we need to go back to the main motion.
Madam Chair. Sorry, I'd like to understand why you would suggest that this is something we do every day at this committee. There's wording that is presented to us in motions, in legislation, in reports, and we look at it, we consider it, and then we look at, well, how could we improve upon this? Is there concerns with it? So I specifically raised that we need to, as a committee, reaffirm that democratic institutions, including school boards, are free
Point
to
of order,
debate.
Madam Chair.
Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Maloney?
You've ruled on the request by Mr. Garrison. Mr. Moore is now questioning that ruling. There's procedure that's in place if he wants to do so. Part of that procedure doesn't include going through what you may have thought about in forming that, reaching that conclusion. So.
Thank you for that, Mr. Maloney.
So I challenge the chair's ruling that
Fair.
changing the language on some of these provisions, like that we are unable to amend motions, is essentially your ruling, and I profoundly disagree with that. So I challenge the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Appreciate that. I'm going to ask the clerk, would you to take a vote on that? Yes. If you, please go ahead.
Thank you. On the question, Madam Chair, is shall the chair's ruling be sustained? So if you are against it, you vote no. So, Mr. Maloney,
Yes.
Madame Brière, Mr. Mendicino,
Oui.
Mr. Housefather,
Oui.
Madame Dillon,
Oui.
Mr. Moore,
No.
Madame Gladu,
No.
Monsieur Caputo,
No.
Mr. Van Popta,
No.
Mr. Garrison,
Yes.
6-9. The chair's decision is sustained.
Okay. Decision sustained. We now go back to the original motion if there's anything that anyone else wishes to say. Ms. Gladu.
Yeah, I just absolutely agree that, there's been an increase of hate and violence towards the 2S LGBTQ community. But I'm disappointed that we couldn't broaden it out because, as Mr. Housefather has already pointed out, there's a huge rise in hatred towards Jews. People are calling death to Jews across the country. It's totally unacceptable. At the same time, many communities, a rise in Islamophobia. We've had 80 Christian churches torched in this country. We've got a Hindu community in my riding that is, really terrified. They're being threatened and they're receiving hate as well. So I'm disappointed that we wouldn't broaden the scope. I think it's an opportunity to not just elevate one community over another, but figure out how we're going to get to the root of preventing this kind of hate and violence rising against many communities.
Mr. Caputo.
Thank you, Chair. I just spoke with Mr. Garrison, and we were sharing some personal things that I found very, very striking. And I believe, in speaking about what Mr. Moore's saying and about the motion in general, I believe I would say, and I think everybody here would say that. Every person in the 2S LGBTQ community has the right to live without fear, has the right to not be worried whether they are, child or adult about violence. And I don't know that there's anybody here who unequivocally wouldn't denounce any sort of violence to anybody in that community, period, full stop. Mr. Garrison told me a story from his riding about somebody whose flag was burned, and a flag is emblematic of so many things when I was thinking about it, including our nation's flag. I think it's fairly important that no matter what the discussion is, we all acknowledge, and I think we all do around this table acknowledge that behavior has no place in Canada, period, full stop, and it has no place regardless of the community. And I think that that's probably where Mr. Moore, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but where he was going with his community. Sometimes I look around, or with his community, with his amendment. Sometimes I look around and I think where what we've seen in the last 6 months, and very much worries me. I want to put my thoughts on the record and do them with as much clarity as I could. This is a bit off the cuff, but I want to be very clear that nobody wants to see violence towards the 2S LGBTQ community, adult or children. We all have a right to live in safety, period. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Can we vote on the motion now?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the main motion, Mr. Maloney,
Yes.
Madame Brière,
Oui.
Mr. Mendicino,
Yes.
Mr. Housefather,
Yes.
Madame Dillon,
Oui.
merci. Mr. Moore,
No.
Madame Gladu,
No.
Mr. Caputo. Mr. Caputo?
I said no.
Sorry, thank you. Mr. Van Popda,
No.
Mr. Garrison,
Yes.
26.
Thank you. Motion is carried. I'm now going to suggest that we deal with the bill before us. And for those of you, thank you very much for the witnesses that have appeared. As you can see, we have witnesses that are here with us to help us go through the different clauses that are in there. Monsieur Philippe Deneau, Madame Riri Chen, and Madame Victoria Netten. And there's also a lot of staff and a lot of technical advice and expertise that are sitting all in the back of them as well, should any question arise that someone else need to come up front and answer. So I'm going to start with that. I am told last time our committee did the study was back in May 2017. The document provided by the department presents proposals to correct certain anomalies, inconsistencies, errors, and to deal with other matters of a non-controversial nature in the statutes and regulations of Canada. Those have to be adopted unanimously by committee members to be carried in the bill that will later be introduced in the House. Changes that are not unanimous will be reported to the House and will not be in the bill to follow. Last time we started by Clause 1 and did them one by one. So I guess the question for you, do you want to proceed that way? And if so, we can have officials make opening remarks if they have any, and maybe add further explanations, whether it's on each one separately or on them all together. Would you like to hear from the expert advice at the table first? Yes, I think I see lots of nodding. So I'm going to turn it over to you to let everyone, all the colleagues in the room here, all the members of Parliament know what this is about and what it encompasses. So over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lily Shen. I'm the Deputy Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Legislative Counsel of the Public Law and Legislative Services sector at the Department of Justice. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I'm pleased to participate in your study of the document titled Proposals for a Miscellaneous Statutes Law Amendment Act 2023. The proposals document was developed as part of the Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Program and it is the result of significant collaboration between the Department of Justice and members of Parliament. To put the Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Program into context, I'd like to begin with a few comments about the history of the program, the criteria used within the program to determine whether a legislative proposal should be retained, and the applicable legislative process. I will then provide a general overview of the proposal document's structure and content. The Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Program was established in 1975 and is designed to accelerate the adoption of minor amendments of a non-controversial nature to be made to Canadian laws. Former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, the Honourable Otto Lang, created this process of making minor amendments to federal legislation via one omnibus bill. Just as it is now, the legislative agenda was very busy back then, making it difficult to make minor changes to or correct the occasional errors in the federal statute, the federal corpus. Consequently, this program was created to make those changes without taking up too much time in either of the two houses. Since the program was established, 12 bills of this kind have been passed, and we are working on the 13th. The Specialized Legislative Services section of the Department of Justice, which is under my mandate, is responsible for this program. This program is a means of correcting anomalies, inconsistencies, archaisms, and errors that can sometimes find their way into federal statutes. More specifically, the program uses a bill to allow minor amendments of a non-controversial nature to be made to a number of federal statutes instead of having a specific bill for each amendment. In certain cases, if the amendments are not made through the program, they may never be made because they are not significant enough to justify the use of resources needed to draft and introduce in Parliament a bill for that sole purpose. Les critères à respecter afin qu'une modification proposée au terme du programme soit retenue apparaissent
appear on the back of the cover page of the proposal document. Specifically, the proposed amendments must be non-controversial, not involve the spending of public funds, not infringe on human rights, and not create an offense or subject a new class of persons to an existing offense. The non-controversial aspect of the amendment is the main criterion to be met under the program. According to the former Minister Otto Lang, compliance with this criterion would not be difficult to establish, and a proposed amendment would be controversial as soon as one of the committee members objected to it. The legislative process under the Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Program is different from the usual legislative process. Essentially, the two houses of Parliament consider the proposal separately in committee with a view to drafting and tabling of bill. Honourable committee members, we can reassure you that if a member of this committee or the committee in the other place that will also study the document objects to a proposed legislative amendment, this amendment will be withdrawn and will not be included in the bill that will then be drafted. The Senate Standing Committee on Legal Affairs completed the review and presented the reports. The bill was presented with some comments on the 12th of January. Once this committee has completed its review and presented its report to the House of Commons, the bill will be reviewed by the Department of Justice, which will include the adopted amendments that were adopted unanimously by the committees, to ensure that there is coordination and consistency between this bill and other existing legislation. The bill will then be presented to Parliament. I will now take a few minutes to explain how the proposals document is organized and to summarize its content. After the inside cover of the document, there's a brief explanation of the history, the criteria, and the legislative process associated with the program. Then there is the analytical table and the proposed amendments. The document contains proposals for 62 statutes. The first 53 sections contain proposed amendments to 26 acts, categorized in alphabetical order, because these laws are part of the review of the Statutes of Canada 1985, pursuant to the drafting practice. From Section 54, the laws are classified in chronological order. Sections 131, 132, and 166 include amendments to the regulations to ensure consistency between the Act and the related regulations with respect to changing the name of the Canada Agricultural Review Tribunal. As a result of the proposed amendments, there is a section entitled Explanatory Notes. These notes provide brief explanations of the reasons for the proposed amendment, as well as the current version of the provision in question.
Amendments in the proposals document correct errors in grammar and terminology and update the name of certain organizations. They also correct typographical errors, errors in references, the use of outdated terms, and discrepancies between the French and English versions. The document also contains proposals repealing certain legislative provisions which are no longer needed. For example, Section 12 of the Department of Transport Act, which predates and duplicates Section 24 of the Interpretation Act, and paragraph E of the definition of provincial company in the Insurance Act, is no longer required, as that company has been amalgamated with another company as defined in the Act. Finally, some of the proposed amendments were also the subject of comments from the Standing Joint Committee on the Scrutiny of Regulations. These amendments will resolve issues raised by that committee, such as aligning the wording between the Prevention of Terrorist Travel Act and the Canadian Passport Order. J'aimerais noter en terminant.
To conclude, I would like to note that we've examined the document and recommended in its report that there will be 4 proposals, 3 to avoid any redundancies with other amendments already made or in the process of being amended through Parliament. These were considered as being beyond the scope of the program with respect to the Corrective Act. Furthermore, the amendment is aimed at avoiding any repetition of words in the French version of the proposed text.
Brought to our attention that Proposal 160 to amendments to the Motor Vehicle Safety Act have actually come into force, and so the proposal in the proposals document is actually spent. Voilà mes observations préliminaires.
Those are my preliminary observations, and Victoria, our and her colleague are members of the Justice Department, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
The responsible departments. And I'd just like to mention the names of two that were added this morning, which may not be on the list. We have David McIntyre and Justin Chen from Public Safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction and summary. Given the time, it's 10:20. Unless no member of this committee has any question at all, and if they do, then I suggest we adjourn and return on Monday. Okay. So thank you for coming. We really appreciate you all being here. We will, I see there's about a dozen or so, probably more, here, but we'll see you Monday morning. Thank you so much, and we hope to conclude it on Monday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.